Hello, my name is Ethan. I stand here, a man whose life peaked and nearly ended at the age of 26. It was January when the final unbearable fracture occurred, an event so severe it felt like a seismic shift within my soul. I discovered that my wife, then 24, had been engaged in an affair, an act that defined a period of absolute darkness. That short 6-week period, which stretched from the start of January to the middle of February, wasn't just a revelation of infidelity, it was a detonation. It completely shattered the fragile architecture of my reality, leaving me standing in the rubble, barely breathing. The devastation was absolute, leading to a severe mental health crisis that required hospitalization and ultimately a massive physical collapse that no young man should ever endure. The memory of those weeks is still a raw, open wound that refuses to clot or heal completely. It was a time I struggled profoundly, wrestling with emotions so large and terrifying that they felt alien to my own experience, consuming every fiber of my being. The pain was deeply physical, an agonizing knot in my chest that refused to loosen, a perpetual, dull ache that radiated into my arm and jaw, signaling distress long before the medical episode. I had reached a point of absolute despair, a desperate, dark moment that led me to seek professional care for self-harm prevention. The irony of seeking help to stay alive while the person I trusted most was actively dismantling my life was a cruel and unending torture that gnawed at my sanity. The pressure cooker of the previous 2 years had already done its damage, preparing the ground for the catastrophic collapse. I was 26 years old and should have been focused on building my career, on enjoying newly life, embracing our shared future. Instead, I was consumed by the brutal reality of supporting 2 people entirely on my own. I worked multiple jobs, sometimes 3 overlapping schedules, sacrificing every ounce of my social life, my hobbies, and my sleep running on sheer willpower and highly toxic levels of caffeine. This was not a choice made for simple luxury or aggressive saving. It was a necessity, born from a deep, non-negotiable sense of responsibility toward her. My wife, since childhood, had endured significant physical issues. These were chronic conditions that made holding down consistent employment incredibly challenging, often resulting in painful flare-ups that confined her to bed for days at a time, requiring my constant patient care. I had taken on the role of the primary caregiver and the sole breadwinner not begrudgingly, but with a deep sense of commitment and purpose, fulfilling the vow I made to protect her in sickness and in health. I saw it as my responsibility, my duty as her husband, to shield her from the stress of financial anxiety while navigating her health struggles, sacrificing my own well-being to protect hers, always putting her needs first. The primary goal of this relentless work was simple independence, a separate, secure space for us to build our own home. We desperately wanted to get out of my parents' home, where we were staying to save money and find stability, an arrangement that had begun to wear on both of us. I poured my energy, my youth, and my very essence into that effort, believing that every late night and every early morning was a direct investment in our shared future and her comfort. My focus was singular, perhaps obsessively so, but it was driven by love and a powerful need to prove I could care for us both, securing the safe life she deserved, a life free from the generational chaos we both knew too well. I remember the grinding reality of those jobs, the soul-crushing redundancy of moving from one low-wage environment to the next, the constant mental calculations of budgets and timesheets. One job was stocking shelves from midnight to 6 a.m., followed by a quick shower and a shift managing a coffee shop until early afternoon. The brief gaps were spent researching business opportunities or simply staring blankly at the wall, too tired to even process thought. I lived in a perpetual fog of exhaustion, existing in a state where I was physically present but emotionally absent, a ghost of myself. I thought my visible sacrifice, my sheer physical endurance, was enough to communicate my commitment. I believed the struggle was temporary, a test we would pass together, and that the financial freedom we sought would justify the pain we were enduring now. I didn't realize that in my frantic pursuit of a safe future, I had neglected the present, allowing a void to open in our emotional connection that no amount of money could ever fill. I was saving us from financial ruin, but exposing us to emotional decay, a tragic failure of perspective. When the discovery of the affair hit, I was already overwhelmed, physically and mentally depleted. The reservoir of patience and resilience I typically relied upon was utterly dry, unable to withstand the shock. The infidelity felt like a betrayal not just of our vows, but of the very purpose that had driven me to exhaustion. I had run myself into the ground to build a safe house for us, only to find that she was seeking comfort and excitement in the poisoned company of another man, finding solace in a lie. The sheer unfairness of it all was a suffocating weight that crushed the last of my spirit, leaving me with nothing but bitter confusion. The affair, in retrospect, was a masterpiece of malicious manipulation, a tactical strike against our weakest points designed to exploit every insecurity we held. The man was my wife's male best friend, a person we both implicitly trusted, a seemingly loyal fixture in our shared history, which only made the venom of his actions more potent. He knew our history, our vulnerabilities, and the deep, silent fears that lay beneath the surface of our marriage. He didn't just stumble into an opportunity, he meticulously engineered it, playing the long game with a calculating cruelty that still chills me to the core, using my dedication and my focus on work as evidence of my presumed abandonment. He weaponized her worst fears, the deepest insecurities she carried about our future and my character, particularly my history with other women, a past I thought I had fully atoned for. His strategy was to make her believe, utterly convincingly, that I was the one cheating on her, that my late nights at work were covers for my own infidelity. He didn't just whisper doubts, he generated overwhelming, tangible proof designed to look absolutely real, exploiting her natural inclination to trust documented evidence over emotional reassurance, using technology as his primary weapon. He coerced his own friends into sending her fake messages, crafting conversations that seemed to confirm I was talking to other women, fabricating entire scenarios with disturbing verisimilitude. The depth of the deceit was horrifying, a truly cinematic level of intentional destruction. He managed to weave specific, believable details into the fabricated texts, subtle references to events only we would know, mimicking my texting style, creating a narrative that was tailored specifically to bypass her critical thinking. This was not a random attack, it was a targeted campaign, based on years of close observation of our relationship dynamics, a cold, calculated assault on the very foundation of our trust. He exploited a specific weakness in her personality, her tendency to believe tangible evidence, especially if it aligned with her deepest, most persistent fears about commitment and fidelity, fears rooted in her own family history. The affair began in the immediate aftermath of our Christmas vacation. That trip, which I had scrimped and saved for, a brief moment of escape intended to be a romantic confirmation of our bond, became the perfect setup for his final move. The time away from our routine, the slight distance, and the inevitable emotional lag of returning home created a vacuum of vulnerability that he exploited ruthlessly, suggesting that the distance was when my imagined infidelity truly flourished. While we were ostensibly reconnecting, he was intensifying his barrage of false evidence, using the perceived secrecy of the trip to fuel her anxiety about my supposed unfaithfulness. When she finally confronted me, she wasn't asking for clarification or a simple explanation. She was presenting me with what she genuinely believed was irrefutable proof, a done deal, the final piece of the puzzle. The affair started because, in her mind, she had been abandoned and betrayed first, falling into a defensive, reactive pattern of seeking emotional refuge from the man who was supposedly destroying her life. This realization, that she had been fundamentally manipulated into a reactive affair, doesn't erase her responsibility for the choices she made, but it does make the emotional landscape infinitely more complex and tragic. It turns the betrayal into a shared trauma, a wound inflicted by an external enemy. When I first discovered the truth about her actions, my world collapsed. I sought self-harm prevention care, not as a manipulative cry for attention, but as a desperate bid to manage the tsunami of pain that threatened to drown me, overwhelming my capacity to cope. I was terrified of losing control, of what I might do to myself under the crushing weight of the betrayal and self-loathing. I entered the safety of the institution, hoping to heal, to find the words to communicate the depth of my anguish, to find a way back to sanity before I lost it completely. But the manipulator was relentless, a true sociopath determined to finish his work. Even after I was hospitalized, he found a way to continue his psychological assault, weaponizing my vulnerability and my genuine pain. He told my wife that my self-harm attempt was nothing more than a calculated, theatrical move, a desperate, fake show of emotion intended to garner sympathy. He insisted I was faking my suffering, claiming I was using emotional blackmail and suicidal ideation merely to pressure her into staying married, into submitting to my will. He successfully presented me as the ultimate villain, the abuser who deserved to be left behind, solidifying his false reality in her mind. She believed him, and the affair continued its devastating course, even with me fighting for my life. The pain of knowing she was still involved, still choosing his narrative over the clear reality of my despair, was worse than the initial discovery. I felt utterly invalidated, invisible, and monstrously misunderstood. My existence, my life, had been completely negated by his lies, and she had allowed it to happen, blinded by the perceived evidence. This prolonged stress, this constant psychological warfare, wore down my body with terrifying speed, eroding my last reserves of physical health. The final catastrophic break came while I was still institutionalized, fighting to regain my emotional footing. My mental state plummeted due to unexpected and violent side effects from the medication I was taking. A dizzying, terrifying convergence of emotional trauma and physiological chaos, a perfect internal storm. It was during this period of extreme vulnerability and physical deterioration that my young, overworked heart simply gave out. I suffered a heart attack at just 26 years old, a statistical impossibility born of relentless, agonizing stress. That heart attack, that terrifying, undeniable proof of my suffering, was the catalyst that finally, brutally shattered the manipulator's facade. The sight of me, frail and fighting for my life in an ICU bed, was a truth too stark and too physical to ignore, a consequence she could no longer rationalize away. It was a biological consequence of the mental anguish he had inflicted, a reality check written in my own failing pulse, a clear sign of the destructive power of his lies. The gravity of the situation, the proximity of my death, finally broke through her denial and the hypnotic spell he had cast over her perception. Faced with the very real possibility of losing me forever, the monster finally crumbled, seeing his scheme unraveling due to the extreme consequences. It was only then, as I lay between life and death, that he admitted the truth. He confessed to the entire calculated scheme, the fabrication of the messages, the deliberate framing, the entire systematic assault on our marriage, revealing the full extent of his cruelty. He laid bare the depth of his sickness and the extent to which my wife had been his victim, a pawn in his selfish, twisted game. The truth came at an unbearable cost. I had to nearly die to prove I was innocent and she was manipulated, a morbid exchange for clarity. Since that terrifying turning point, we have been locked in a determined, painful process of trying to work things out, clinging to the remnants of our love. The commitment is there, but the emotional machinery is broken, moving in fits and starts, prone to seizing up at the slightest tremor of doubt. We are navigating reconciliation under the shadow of death and deceit. We talk for hours. We revisit the trauma. We try to rebuild the trust that was so systematically demolished, moving forward one agonizing conversation at a time, forced to be completely vulnerable. Then, just a couple of weeks after we began this excruciating process of rebuilding, a new, overwhelming reality landed in our lap. My wife is pregnant. The news was a shockwave, a sudden and profound reminder of the intimacy we once shared, and a physical sign of potential new life amidst the wreckage. But the joy was instantly tempered by the cold, immediate dread of uncertainty, the paralyzing fear that the baby might not be mine, a terrible, final betrayal. We had to sit down and meticulously check the timelines, dissecting the few weeks the affair had lasted against our own intimate moments. The thought that the baby might not be mine was a fresh wave of panic, a potential tragedy that could obliterate any hope of healing, crushing the nascent possibility of a new beginning. The clinical detachment required for this task, cross-referencing betrayal and passion, was deeply disturbing, a required dehumanization of our history, a moment of profound sadness. I needed certainty. I needed to know the child was mine, or any hope of recovery would instantly die. My wife understood the absolute necessity of this brutal inspection. She went above and beyond to provide definitive proof, offering up every avenue for investigation. She consented to prenatal testing, a procedure that, while invasive and humiliating, offered the only way to banish the doubt that clawed at my mind. The test came back definitive: the baby is mine. This technical, scientific certainty was a life raft in the sea of my emotional confusion, confirming that our physical bond, at least, had been unbroken during that dark period. She explained, and I verified through the messages she later shared, that the physical distance between them, more than a 24-hour drive, was a crucial barrier that prevented physical infidelity. She doesn't own a car, and he would have had to travel across states to reach us, something that would have required him to come to my parents' home, the most fortified and unlikely place for a tryst. That location was heavily monitored. My father is a Marine veteran, and my uncle is a retired police officer. The property is lined with approximately 65 security cameras, making any unauthorized, secret physical encounter virtually impossible. The physical betrayal was absent, but the emotional and visual betrayal, the sharing of photographs, the intimate words, still cut deep, and infidelity of the spirit. In a radical attempt to escape the relentless haunting of the past, we chose to run. We moved to a new state entirely, shedding the weight of the geography that had witnessed my collapse and her subsequent guilt. We needed to put physical distance between ourselves and the scene of the trauma, away from the hospital, away from the familiar streets that reminded me of the despair, and most crucially, away from the remote proximity of the man who had tried to kill me through psychological warfare. We believed a new environment, a clean slate, would force a new narrative of recovery, allowing us to define our future without the ghosts of the past. But physical distance doesn't erase psychological trauma, it simply gives it a new backdrop. I am still overwhelmed by the memories, the persistent, insidious playback of what happened. I wake up seeing the notification on the phone. I feel the crushing chest pain of the heart attack, and I hear the man's vile claims about being a better match. I just don't know how to move past everything for myself, for her, and for the life of our unborn child who deserves a whole and peaceful father. The pregnancy is a beautiful, constant reminder of hope, but also a stark, daily reminder of the vulnerability of our foundation, forcing us to confront our fragility. I want to state clearly for anyone judging our situation, I am not defending her. I am clarifying the nature of the betrayal, the immense psychological damage that occurred due to his calculated plan. She has taken absolute, agonizing responsibility for her part, acknowledging her failure to communicate her fears and her misguided trust in the wrong person. She completely cut off contact with every single person involved. The man, his friends, everyone, the very day I confronted her, demonstrating a fierce and immediate commitment to reconciliation. She sat with me, enduring the raw, visceral pain of my discovery, and she told me the exact dates the emotional affair began and what it entailed. She gave me her phone, the very object of the betrayal, and allowed me to read every single message, sacrificing every shred of her own privacy and dignity to prove the story and provide the facts. She knew that providing the factual evidence was the only path, however painful, to rebuilding trust, even if it meant exposing her deepest mistakes and the extent of her own shame. The man's own words, found in the messages, were a window into his dark intent. He openly stated his desire to cause me so much pain that my wife would leave me. He declared, with unbelievable arrogance, that he was a superior match for her. A sickening delusion, given that I was the one who was committed, married, and working ceaselessly to provide for her security and medical needs. His goal was possession and destruction, and he very nearly succeeded in both, only being thwarted by my body's physical protest against the emotional pain. We both share this toxic inheritance of adultery. Our father's infidelities tore our respective families apart, creating a shared, primal fear of betrayal that was always present in the background of our lives. This history was the key the manipulator used to unlock her doubt, the tool he sharpened against our weakest link. My own past, my promiscuity in high school, provided the material for his lies. She didn't talk to me about her fears, she internalized them, allowing the seeds of doubt to grow into belief. When his manufactured evidence appeared, it simply confirmed the narrative she was already terrified of. She believed her husband was repeating his past, and that deeply ingrained fear, exploited by a sociopath, led her down the path of emotional infidelity. We both know there is no excuse for what she did. She understands that giving her heart, her energy, and her intimacy, even electronically, to another man was a complete violation of our vows and a catastrophic mistake. She is putting in the work. She is present, remorseful, and utterly transparent. Yet, the work is not enough to quell the constant internal warfare within me. The battle wages on in the silence of my own mind. The facts of the prenatal test and the geographical impossibility of a physical encounter confirm the truth. But the emotional truth is a scar I can't erase, a deep internal burn that still aches. I constantly struggle with the difference between ours rational knowledge and emotional reality. I know she didn't sleep with him, but I feel the betrayal as if she had. My body remembers the heart attack. My mind replays the moment of discovery. The emotional memory system is still stuck on high alert, firing off panic every time she is quiet or late coming home from an errand, a perpetual state of hyper-vigilance. This internal conflict is paralyzing. I am working out 3 times a week, a desperate attempt to force the trauma out of my body through physical exertion, trading psychological pain for muscular soreness. I focus on my job, trying to build a foundation that is now twice as necessary because of the new life on the way, recognizing that financial stability is now a form of therapy. I spend every moment I can being present with her, offering physical reassurance, trying to heal the wounds with my actions, trying to live up to the man she needs me to be, a rock she can finally lean on. But the persistent questions are a form of torture. How do I quiet the voice that tells me I was not enough, that my sacrifice was meaningless? How do I stop judging her past choices against the innocence of her current remorse? How do I fully trust the mother of my child when I know how easily she was manipulated, how completely her perception of reality was warped by fear? The doubt is an acidic poison that corrodes my peace from within. We have a new life, a new beginning, and a commitment that is tested every single hour. I know my priority is the baby, the new life that needs a whole, stable father. The fear of repeating the cycle of broken homes is a constant, motivating force. I refuse to let the trauma of my father's actions or the monster's scheme define my child's life. I will break the cycle that nearly broke me, ensuring that our child grows up in a home defined by healing, not chaos. I am battling to forgive myself for the trauma I endured, to heal the young man who almost died on a hospital bed, to recover the innocence that was stolen from me. I am fighting to be a fully recovered man, not just a survivor, and to find a way to quiet the constant, internal alarm bells. This is the truth of my 26-year-old life, a quiet, desperate struggle for peace in a new state, trying to build a future under the crushing weight of a traumatic past, all for the sake of the life we are bringing into the world. I am determined to win this battle, but the path is shrouded in fear and uncertainty, a difficult ascent toward a fragile hope. I need to learn how to live with the scar, how to stop reliving the moment I nearly died to save my marriage, how to accept that my pain was real and valid. I am ready to be a father, but I am still struggling to be a fully recovered man. This is the challenge that faces us now, in this new state, with this new life growing between us. We have survived the war, but the recovery from the wounds is proving to be the hardest battle yet, requiring a level of patience and self-compassion I never knew I possessed. I just need to know how to keep breathing until the light returns, how to fully accept the paradox of our love and our trauma, and how to define our relationship by the strength of our reconciliation, not the tragedy of the betrayal. I just need the strength to walk away from the past, one slow step at a time, protecting the fragile hope of a peaceful tomorrow for my child, making peace with the impossible reality of my situation. The fight for my mental health is the fight for my family's future, and I am committed to winning it, even if the process takes years of agonizing effort. The memory will always be there, but I am learning to build my life around the scar, not on it.